everybody, today I'm going to show you how to make this card, and that birthday stamp is not a big circle stamp. That's actually one little stamp stamped 8 times using the MISTI stamping tool. So to start with, I cut my circle out with the largest size of the large circle nestabilities, and you can stamp your pattern on the circle if you want, and you just stick it into the corner, but you'd have to rotate it by eyeballing it, and you might not get the perfect pattern. So my secret to doing this is using an octagon. And what I've done is cut an octagon out of scrap cardstock with my electronic die cutting machine. And the thing to remember is that you need to make sure that your octagon is larger than your circle piece. And you're going to mount your circle centered on your octagon, and I just put a little bit of ATG adhesive down to stick that together. And now you're ready to get stamping. The thing to remember with the octagon is that you're not wedging it up into the corner. You're actually going to make sure that this bottom and the side are firmly pressed up against the sides of the MISTI, and that will make sure that you're stamping in the same spot every time. So I'm using this Mama Elephant set called Happy Everything, and right now I'm using the birthday stamp. And what I'm going to do is line it up on my circle kind of towards the middle of that side, and you look at the edges where the octagon is, and that's what I'm using to center it. Now I've got it straight, I think, and I'm going to close my cover and pick it up. But I don't want to stamp it straight. I actually want it to stamp in kind of a little curve to match the curve of my circle. So what I'm going to do is move my stamp just a little bit, just the ends, so that it forms a curve. And I'm leaving the center exactly where it was so that I know that's where I wanted it to stamp. Then I'm going to close my cover, and I'm so sorry for the glare from my lights here, but I'm checking to see if it's how I want it, and it was a little bit too curved, so I'm adjusting it there. And then I'm going to close the cover and check again, and this is how I want it, so I'm going to get ready to stamp. Always making sure that those two edges are firmly placed up against the sides of the MISTI. Here I'm using Melon Mambo ink from Stampin' Up, and I inked up my stamp, and I'm going to close the MISTI and stamp it, and there is my first birthday image. Now to rotate this, you don't even have to move that magnet in the center. You just grab a corner and rotate it, and then make sure your sides are pressed up against the sides of the MISTI. They should both be flat against the sides. And then you can ink up your stamp again and stamp it down. So again, you just rotate it. Make sure that those sides are flush against the sides of the MISTI. Then ink up your stamp and stamp down again. Now I'm going to be continuing this, but you don't need to see that, so I'm going to go all the way around, and I'll be right back. Okay, here I am stamping that last birthday, and now you can see I've got my birthday in a continuous pattern all around my circle, and they're all evenly spaced. Next, what I'm going to do is put away my ink pad and clean off my MISTI and my stamp. I have a little baby food container that I kept from when my kids were young, and I keep my baby wipe in it, and the cover shuts so that it keeps it from drying out too fast. And then the other thing is that if you just leave your baby wipe out, it could fall down on your project, and then you'd get a big inky soggy mess right on your project. But if the baby food container falls on it, it's no big deal. So that's why I keep the baby wipe in the container like that. It's nothing special, just a plain old baby wipe. Okay, now I'm going to put away my stamp and make sure my MISTI is dry. And then I'm going to get out the large happy sentiment from the same set. And I'm going to line it up on my project where I want it to go. And it doesn't really matter if it's crooked. It looks crooked there, but it doesn't really matter because it's a round circle. So I'm going to actually turn it when I get that onto my project. And of course it's going to stick to your cardstock, so you just remove it and then again make sure it's flush to those sides. And then you can go ahead and ink up your stamp and stamp it. And to ink up my stamp, I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is my favorite ink for stamping sentiments, when I'm using black, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and ink that up really well and stamp it down. When I picked up the cover, I noticed there were a few little spaces that were kind of splotchy and didn't stamp really nice and solid. So I'm going to go ahead and ink up that stamp again and stamp it down. And remember to just have it in the same place that you had it the last time, and the MISTI will stamp it in exactly the same place. And you don't have to worry about getting a funny shadow or halo around it because you're not lining it up perfectly. The MISTI does that for you. So there, I'm really happy with how that looks, and I will zoom in so that you can see. There's my birthday all around and my happy in the middle. Okay, now it's time for me to make a card out of this. So I've got my focal panel, which I need to take off of my octagon. And sometimes what I do is I just twist off the piece on the top, and if that doesn't work, then I'll just flip it over and carefully peel the octagon off the back. You want to peel off the octagon because it's going to bend the octagon and not your circle, and you'll keep your circle nice and flat. I'm going to stick some ATG adhesive on the back of that. And I've got a piece of Melon Mambo cardstock that I've folded into a 4 1/4 inch square card base, and that's the same color that I stamped the birthday in. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stick that down. Very simple and easy, nothing too fancy. But I think this is a fun technique to have that birthday all around it in a circle. And you know, you don't have to use a sentiment for your circular pattern. You can also use other things like these flowers, and this is from the Unico Studio Background Builders Vines set. And you can see that I just stamped the roses, the leaves, and then those little accent flowers all the way around in the pattern. And here's another pattern on a smaller circle that I did with that same set. So if you have any sets with tiny little stamps and you don't know what to do with them, they might make a nice little border around a circle thing, and then you can just add whatever you want in the center, like a die cut or a stamped image, or you can even layer multiples on each other to make just a really nice design. One thing is, if you're using a smaller circle, you might have a hard time centering it exactly on a larger octagon like I did here. And so my tip for that would be to try and match the size of your octagon to the size of your circle. If you're using a smaller circle, cut a smaller octagon. If you're using a bigger circle, cut a bigger octagon. Just remember that the octagon needs to be bigger than the circle, but it doesn't have to be a lot bigger. So it's actually easier if you match the sizes up like this one, then it's easier to center, and you'll get a perfect pattern every time. So I hope you like this project, and if you did like it and like the video, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. And here is my finished card once again. And I would love it if you would visit my blog at mycasestudies.blogspot.com. And this is Maureen. Thanks very much for watching.